It's really cool to be here. Much appreciated. You just heard, I'm Matt Linder. I'm a senior machine learning engineer at Headspace Health. I used to be a professional musician. Ask me about it later. So I'm going to get right into things because my talk is a little bit of trying to fit 10 pounds of stuff in a 5-pound bag. So I'm going to talk fast. Feel free to ask questions after. So the introduction that I want to give here is just, if you don't know Headspace, Headspace Health, it is all about mindfulness, meditation, mental wellness. We build iOS, Android, and web-based apps that focus on improving people's health and happiness through mindfulness, through practicing meditation, etc. In the talk, we're going to talk about ML for personalization, served via push notifications. I'm going to use very, very specific examples from our recent experience. We're a really young, new team. To hopefully talk about things that are generalizable. So we're learning and failing fast, and hopefully you can learn fast from that too. So the agenda, I'm going to move through real quick. Initial motivations in an experiment that we did, the experience that we kind of had from that version 0, learnings, current, future path. Those are going to be kind of the 3 things we cover. So we're going to be specifically talking about this concept of ML personalizations, in this case serving personalized content recommendations as care, meeting people where they are with what they need in the moment. So until this project, ML was all in-app at Headspace. You had to have the app open to see these recommendations, and that was kind of part of the problem that we wanted to work with because we wanted to get to people outside of the app. So really quick, I'm going to just race through this slide because what we were trying to do was serve that outside of the app, build out the infrastructure to do so. We got really nice results in very specific metrics along the way. We implemented that in production to continue iterating on it, and at the end of the blog post that I wrote last October about this, which you can go read, which talks about this in more detail, I said, you should too. So now, since I did too, I'm going to talk about the experience of doing that. So first thing I want to talk about is kind of the unique goals of content at Headspace, because I think it's a little bit different from most other content-based companies. I feel like, and I'm not trying to negatively stereotype here, right? Feel free to push back if you don't think this is true, but I feel like at most content companies, more engagement is better. You watched one, please watch more. The more things people watch, the more things people experience, the more likely they are to retain, to come back, right? So it's kind of this idea of like, please binge, thank you, continue. So for us, it is actually a little bit different, where because of the product that we're serving, the content that we're serving, we're trying to help people develop a practice. If someone is meditating once a day, that's awesome. We really want that consistency. We don't design content that's meant to be binged. You're not going to get more healthy, more mindful by binging 6 hours of meditation content, probably. I haven't tried, but I don't think it's going to work. So we often talk to really difficult need states, and we sort of advise mindfulness. We want people to not be in the app constantly. So there is this idea, if we're telling people to get out of the app, that we have to eventually tell them, hey, come back to the app, you forgot today. So that's kind of one of our problems, is we did some really cool user segmentation, and we realized, of course, that we have these inactive and dormant members defined by different metrics, and how do we reach these people to keep up their practice, right? These are the people who are most likely to churn, and these are the people who aren't getting the help that we're trying to give them. So, personalization. I just want to go through a little bit of what I think about personalization, because when I open Spotify and I see this, I'm kind of like, oh, pop music, that's the music that most people like. That doesn't feel very personalized. Why should I personally care about that? Why am I seeing this, right? Whereas when I see things like based on your recent listening and made for me, that feels really personalized. And I see things that I recognize from my own listening experience, right? So that ties it to things that I already have a relationship. It feels personalized. And so that feels good. That gives me a meta-awareness, not only of things are being recommended to me, but also why things and how things are being recommended to me. So this is like, my concept here of explainable AI is the product features we build on top of our ML models that kind of make those workings more transparent and builds trust and connection. So here was sort of my first stab at explainable AI, was this concept of like, since you liked X, you might also like Y, right? So what does this do? It ties the ML model's recommendation to previously experienced content, which you've necessarily sort of established a relationship with. You completed it in this case. We're optimizing in this case for content complete, right? So I find this primes me like to take whatever positive relationship I probably had with something I watched all of and take it into that next one. It feels personalized, and also this is, again, it's kind of a familiar UX pattern. I've been using Spotify for over 10 years now, so I know what it's like to be like, oh, I liked this, I might like that, right? So it has a flow to it. Okay, this is the second thing I wanted to talk about, though, in terms of the case of explainable AI and of serving personalization at Headspace. This is not an abstract subject. Look at those content names if you can read them at this distance. This content is super intense, right? It is meant for very specific, very sensitive need states. This is content that is aimed at specific people, our members, who are in a very real spot in whatever journey they're on in terms of like mental health. So this is the tricky part. Our model has an optimization objective, but that does not consider human concerns at all. So what we kind of think of is explainability, and the systems that we build around that are kind of like satisficing constraints. This relationship with content is super private, and so with this content in particular, I think there's the very valid question of like, should some of these things be recommendable at all, ever? We could design a perfect system as far as we know, but there's no such thing as recall of one in the real world in practice, right? And even once recommending pregnancy or cancer or other content to the wrong person is a mistake that none of us want to make. So we establish a block list. It's a pretty simple policy, and in fact, actually, we've inverted it to a whitelist for functionality reasons. We can talk about later if you're interested in that particular thing. So we're trying to make these recommendations as trustworthy as teachers, because these are meditation teachers. And we take this super seriously. We want this to feel like Headspace. So being able to explain to people how and why they were served a recommendation feels really important to us. Okay, when we ran this first experiment in production of serving those types of explainable recommendations via push, we got really awesome initial results. Woo, look at these metrics, huge lift numbers in stuff like open rate. That means our copy, our language probably felt really good and made people want to open these messages more than typical messages. Maybe that's the personalization. We've been testing that. We also got this crazy lift number in terms of like this very specific metric of content complete %. So let me define that really quick. That is treatment, meaning ML-powered notifications over control, which is globally popular content in the context of how often people completed something for each notification sent. So it's hyper-specific, but it was super exciting. You can imagine what we don't have here: global engagement numbers, retention numbers, active days, things like that, right? So this was super promising initially along specific vectors, but we needed to explore way more. We also noticed that, hey, we had this copy paradigm that we were using. Since you liked X, you might also like Y. Amazing template. And we implemented a block list, so we're going to prevent people from saying you might also enjoy emptiness or lust or whatever inappropriate thing we don't want to say. So what could possibly go wrong, right? Like, everything's perfect. How about since you liked, guilt, since you liked anger? What we hadn't put in place when we first started designing this was censoring people's content complete history. Who would think about that? Who would say that, like, I should censor what you have viewed from you? You viewed it, right? In fact, your specific need state at the moment is probably related to the things you've experienced. So how do we kind of walk that tightrope of not serving inappropriate notifications while at the same time tying things to people's experience? We set up guardrails, right? So we tried something that we thought was a little bit better. We tried more objective language. And we were like, oh, cool, this will probably work. All of this is in our internal testing, and so I'll get to that in a second. You can probably also imagine how this might not work that well, right? Why is this so difficult? Because some of this content, as we've said, is so sensitive. It's hard. We can't recommend it, but maybe we can't even mention it because did you enjoy panicking? Like, you can't say that, right? So we had to come up with solutions where we wanted this explainability, but what do we do when we're actually have to censor the reason why something's explainable in the first place, right? So this is a really interesting question that we've had to wrestle with. And so again, I want to bring it back to kind of, I think, the main thing here, which is that our model doesn't care about the name of the content. It views it as a number, and so this is not a consideration that's possible to pack into our optimization objective, right? Maybe we could try to be cool and build a meta system on top of that that does this, but functionally that's not a good first step, and practically this is human in the loop type stuff, right? This is the kind of stuff we're always going to feel safest when we are the ones making the decisions about this. How do we do that? gut checking things, dog fooding things. This is such a huge part of this process, right? So what I mean by that in this case is I literally spend a lot of my time in developing this model, building methods that take in our sample predictions and previously played content along with the different copy, meaning language, variants that we're testing. And then I filter by our block list first to see, hey, how does the stuff we're testing interact with stuff that's in the block list? Is it possible to do well, or do we need to sort of dance around that? And then I actually take off those filters and I run it for everything and look at hundreds and thousands. It's not very efficient, but it's necessary in this case, and you can process it, right? We have spreadsheets and notebooks for that, but like of just looking at a broad swath of saying, is this going to work for everything? And this is how we caught all these crazy examples. So other challenges that cropped up, I'm gonna go really fast, can talk about this later if we want. Building ML on a new surface, we had to build a lot of new measurement tools in terms of readouts for experiments being run on a different surface. We had to extend our A/B testing functionality for that new surface because it's really different from in-app. We also had to build out a bunch of new engineering infrastructure for monitoring because, again, new surface, like I said, so new alerting, monitoring, and dashboard, all that stuff. But now the exciting part, which is where we are right now, right? So we launched some cool tech. We saw a great lift along very specific metrics. But what about global engagement? What about all these other larger primary metrics we care about? How does this interact with the universe of non-ML push notifications at Headspace? Because we have a lot of those. We have an amazing lifecycle marketing team whose software we were kind of borrowing for this, right? Building on top of. So we had to get into the actual state of notification, like the whole system at Headspace. And this confusing looking graph of the type of reminders on the left, the way users interact with them in the middle, the platform next to that, and then the end result here was the result of so much engineering and product work built on top of Lifecycle. We came in and we were like, hey, we're gonna pair with Lifecycle to try to, since personalization was so effective, let's build a system on top of that. And what that ended up looking like conceptually is this concept of air traffic control. We were inspired by our own success in initial testing, but also LinkedIn. Huge props to LinkedIn. There's a blog post there that is linked to in my notes for my talk that names air traffic control and their process for it. It's amazing. You should read it. It totally inspired this whole idea. But the idea of taking in all these types of reminders and building an both heuristic and ML-powered air traffic controller on top of Braze, which is the management system we use for that stuff, combine that with our existing and soon to be built out A/B testing infrastructure and use that to kind of control all of these things going in and out. But here's the thing. This is a giant monolith that we're talking about, right? How do we know that any of these things that seem like great ideas are going to be effective? And that's where we come to this process that we've been in right now of iterative design, of taking each of these steps, copy in the notifications, timing of the notifications, quantity, triggers, everything, every parameter you can think of in terms of how to control notifications, we are testing iteratively to build out the type of air traffic control that works for us. We don't necessarily need this whole thing until we establish that we need every part of it. So we're using this iterative process, and to do that, we've been doing sort of scaling our internal processes. What does that mean? When I started this process, I was like a sole ML engineer working on something by myself with one other ML engineer for a while. Then he left, and it was just me. And so what happened as we worked on this is we actually started building in a hub and spoke model with the ML team. So that embedded me in a product squad to do this, and that changed everything. Because it really allowed me to not just have me, an ML engineer, thinking about product, but work with product managers to do things like grab other resources, grab more engineering teams so I don't be a bottleneck, change our KPIs according to different product considerations. That also gave us the power to establish negative control groups in certain aspects of our A/B testing framework, global holdout groups for push notifications, implementing necessary in-app events that give us visibility here. And it also allowed me to sort of like bring non-ML teammates on board with ML, because if you're in this room, you know, there's some selection bias. You probably think ML AI is pretty cool, but like not everybody knows exactly the way it works, right? We just heard two amazing talks in terms of taking the arcana of ML and sort of like building it into broader systems. So in our case, embedding me or other ML engineers was part of that process. There's also, this is kind of not an afterthought, but I'll go fast. We work on Databricks, and just establishing our Git flow on that was huge in terms of scaling up our processes. I don't even want to talk about what code review looked like before I got there, but it looks a lot better now. Okay, what are we doing right now? Like I said, we're iterating on all these aspects towards an air traffic control. We're experimenting with copy. We're doing test and roll. There's this amazing academic paper by these authors that you should totally check out, also linked in my notes if you can check those out after. Test and roll is so cool. It combines aspects of A/B testing and bandits. It's really, really awesome. It's been working really well for us. We've also been experimenting with timing. Previously, we were using Braze's timing for when people were most likely to be using the app, which meant they were sending all the sleep notifications in the morning, and that's dumb. So, well, it's probably dumb. So we're testing how dumb it is by experimenting with the timing for our notifications. We're also experimenting with models. This is going to be blocked by that little image of me. I don't have time to talk about the cool ML stuff, but come talk to me after if you want to, because we're implementing all sorts of awesome transformer-based models, including TSAS-Rec. It's a time-aware sequence transformer recommender. It's really, really cool for these purposes. So what are the next steps? Interpretability for that next model, right? I talked about the previous model and how we worked with building explainability as this sort of outward-facing aspect, product-wrapped aspect of interpretability. Well, when we change the model, we're going to have to figure out how that works for the next. And in fact, we're going to systematize this because we can't keep coming up with a new thing every time we change the model. What else? We're iterating towards air traffic control, whatever that finally ends up looking like because of our iterative design process. And also, this is awesome. I'm doing code review for a reinforcement learning framework next week. I'm so excited. I'm really excited for a bunch of the RL talks here. So that's really, really cool. Thank you. In conclusion, the things I wanted to just wrap this up with are we give our recommender systems optimization objectives. But the real thing here is those are really great for optimizing for very specific non-human facing things, but we have product constraints, satisficing constraints that we need to meet, and that's kind of where this product framework around the ML model comes into play. We gained the knowledge of how to do this through firsthand experience, especially with testing, gut checking our results, dog fooding, to figure out how to wrap those in products before we ship it. So again, just thinking of these real world constraints of the model that we figure out by experiencing it. Yeah, the product is larger than the algorithm here. And so that's been a process that we've been learning how that works by experience. Thank you.